Hello, Algebra 2. Okay, so I thought I would create a review video, especially since the test is tomorrow, right before Thanksgiving. So let's go through this. The first question says that a graph of the two rational functions f and g are shown below. One of them is given by the expression 2 minus 3x over x. Which graph is it? So the things that we're given, we can see that the vertical asymptote is probably 0 on both of them. So that's not going to help me distinguish between the two graphs. So what I'm going to do is look for the horizontal asymptote. So go ahead and hit pause and find the horizontal asymptote. Okay, so just as a quick reminder, when we are looking for the horizontal asymptote, we say, ha, that's a really big number, and we plug in a really big number. When you are using your calculator, go ahead and do 2 minus 3,000 and then divide it. Find the numerator, then the denominator, use your parentheses. If it's giving you -1, what you probably didn't do is you need to put parentheses around the 2 and the negative. So it needs to have two sets of parentheses. Or you can just find the numerator, then the denominator. Okay, so I got -3. Well, when I plugged in a really big number, I got -2.9998. So then that means it's going to be really close to -3. And the only one that has a -3 horizontal asymptote is f of x. So that would be it. Now, when we look at the second one, we're comparing these two graphs. So we've got the function 1 plus 2 plus 4x over x minus 2. Well, the problem is both of these have the same horizontal asymptote, and it's like right at 5. So when I draw an asymptote, I wonder if this will let me do it. When I draw an asymptote, I typically start at this line and then just work my way across. So right there. Okay, pretend that's straight. And then I would do the same here. Whoops. So see, my horizontal asymptote, oh my goodness, this graph is so bad, is at 5. So then that's not going to be very helpful. Let me see. So that's not going to be very helpful. So what I want to do now is I want to find the vertical asymptote. So what I would like you to do is hit pause and find that vertical asymptote. So again, a reminder, when we're finding the vertical asymptote, we take the denominator and we set it not equal to 0, because the vertical asymptote is the value of x that's going to make our function not work, and the only one that was going to make it not work is the one that's in the denominator. So we do x minus 2 is not equal to 0, so we get the vertical asymptote of x equals 2, and the only one that has a vertical asymptote of x equals 2 is f of x. How do I know? The vertical asymptote is x equals 2. So when I'm looking for your explanations, your work is good enough. Like if you had just this right here, that's good enough for me. All right, go ahead and work on number 3. So number 3 is right here. We want to solve. Now the easiest thing to do is find the what I would do is find the common denominator. A lowest common multiple between 8 and 24 is 24. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 3, and then I'm going to solve it. So go ahead and hit pause. Try that one for this one. And then for this one, we want to undo the division. So we're going to multiply both sides by x, and then we'll multiply both sides by 10. So go ahead and hit pause and do that. Okay, so if you are looking right here, we have got, I multiplied top and bottom by 3, and I ended up with 6 over 24 is equal to x over 24. And if the answer wasn't really obvious to you, then I needed to undo the division. So I multiplied both sides by 24. Well, 24 was in both denominators. So that gave me 6 equals x, and I was done. On this side, I multiplied both sides by x first, and I got 3 is equal to 16x over 10, and then I multiply both sides by 10, and that gave me 30 over 16 is equal to 16 over x. It gave me 30 equals 16x, and then I divided both sides by 16, and I got x was equal to 15 over 8, or 1.875. All right. So now let's go to this one. This is the literal equation. So what I would like you to do is first off do the opposite of everything that's happening here. and we're dividing by 3. Multiplying by 1/3 is the same as dividing by 3. And so we want to make sure that we get rid of that denominator first, and then we'll deal with the rest of it. So go ahead and hit pause and do that. Okay, so the first step I did is I multiplied both sides by 3, and I got 3v was equal to pi r squared times h. I could see that I was multiplying by pi and multiplying by r squared, so I divided both sides by pi r squared, and my final answer was 3v divided by pi r squared. The same is true here. If I wanted to solve for v, I needed to get rid of that denominator, so I multiplied both sides by d, and I got ed, or d times e, however you have it, is equal to v, and then I was done. All right, so now we need to go to this one. We are going to be graphing. So what I'm going to be looking for is the vertical asymptote, the horizontal asymptote, y-intercept, the domain, the range. And I don't remember, if your paper doesn't have y-intercept on it, that's okay. We will get that next year, but maybe you found it. But if yours didn't have that, that's okay. Okay, so if you are looking at this, I found the vertical asymptote by taking that denominator, setting it not equal to 0, and I got +1, so I drew that in. Then I plugged in a really big number for my horizontal asymptote, and I got y was equal to 2, so I plugged that in. I drew in those dashed lines. And then I chose my numbers based on where my vertical asymptote was. So since my vertical asymptote is at 1, I chose 0, -1, and -2, and I plugged those in. And then I chose 2, 3, and 4. And when I plugged those in, I got my graph looking like this. If you have any questions, please let me know. But otherwise, I can help you with plugging that into your calculator, but you should be able to do that. Okay, so here is number 6, and you need to find all of these things. So go ahead and hit pause and do that now. So one thing I want to point out is when we are looking at the vertical asymptote, I know that we're setting it not equal to 0 because we don't want x to equal that, but that's how we get our line. So when I put x plus 4 does not equal 0, I get x is equal to -4 or not equal. I don't really care how you state it, but it's going to be this dashed line right here. When I do my horizontal asymptote, I plug in a very large number, and I got really close to -3, so I went ahead and put that right there. Now your y-intercept is a point, so it should say 0, -2.5. So right there. And I went ahead and graphed it as soon as I found it. Then our domain is going to be all real numbers except -4. -4 is that vertical asymptote. And our range is going to be all real numbers except 3. I'm sorry, -3, which is right here. Oops, sorry, which is right here. So -4 goes with the x values and -3 goes with the y values. That makes sense. Then I went ahead and plugged it in. Again, I used my vertical and asymptote to help me decide what values I wanted. So I did 1 over -5, -6, and -7. So -5, -6, and -7. And then I went, I'm at -4, so I want to do -3, -2, and -1. I had already found 0, so I skipped -1 and did 0, so I didn't have to do more work. That's up to you. If you did -1, it should be about right here. If you didn't, that's okay too. All right, so just make sure you have enough. Now let's go on to this one. The Booster Club has $400 to spend on sweatshirts. The number of sweatshirts they can buy is the function of the price of the sweatshirts, P, in dollars, given f of p equals 400 divided by p. Here's the graph of y equals f of p. What does f of 40 mean in this situation? And at what value of p does the graph have a vertical asymptote? Explain how you know what this asymptote means in this situation. So go ahead and hit pause and do that. So before I started this problem, I set up my x and my y axis, and I've got that the x-axis is going to be the number of sweatshirts, the y-axis is going to be the cost of sweatshirts. So not price, but cost, or the price of each sweatshirt, cost of each sweatshirt, doesn't really matter. So what does f of 40 mean in this situation? That means that if I plug in 40, I end up in 10, which means $10 per shirt when ordering 40, which is right there. I have an order of number of 40 sweatshirts, and the cost is going to be $10. So it says what value of P is going to be my vertical asymptote, which is $0. 0 is going to be it. And we kind of talked about this at the beginning of the unit when we talked about if we needed to we were riding that bike, and if we were going 0 miles, but we needed to get to 13 miles, we would end up at infinity. So that would mean, so as the number of shirts decrease, the cost of the shirts increases, right? So it goes way up here. But if we ordered 0 shirts, we would be at infinity. We'd have to jump to infinity because that would be the most they could ever cost. We can't actually do that, so that doesn't make sense in this situation. But it doesn't make sense to buy 0 shirts. So however you worded that, hopefully you worded it in that kind of thing. Or maybe you said, as the shirts increase, so as it gets larger and larger, the cost of the shirts go down. So that's basically what I'm looking for from you. Go ahead and go to the next one, which is this one right here. There are many square prisms with a volume of 340 cubic inches. Let W represent the side lengths of the square base and H represent the height in inches. Then the formula V in cubic inches of the prism is V equals W squared times H. And the equation for the surface area S in square inches is S is equal to 2W squared plus 4WH. So what I want you to do is answer these 3 questions, hit pause and do that. So I went ahead and set everything up. I knew the volume was 340 cubic inches, so I went ahead and replaced that right there. And then I solved for H when I got to this part. So I knew I needed to divide both sides by W squared to get the H by itself, and I did. Then I used substitution. Substitution right here. I knew what H was, so that's why I have this arrow right here. So I got 2W, so S equals 2W squared plus 4WH. I can replace the H with what I found. Then I end up with 2W squared plus 4W times 340 over W squared, which gives me that 1360W. Well, W squared is really just W times W, and since this is all being multiplied, I can simplify it into 1, and my final answer is 2W squared plus 1360 over W. Then our next question is solving for x with both of these, except this one is an a, not an x. So solve for x and then solve for a. Okay, so this one was a little bit tougher. So I knew I was dividing by x plus 2, and notice that I put parentheses around that. I put parentheses around that because I want to remind myself, hey, don't split those up. So I multiplied both sides by x plus 2 because I was originally dividing by it, and that gave me just a 3 equals 5 times x plus 2 over x plus 4, but I'm divided by x plus 4, so I want to multiply those out. So I multiplied top and bottom, both sides by x plus 4, and that gave me x plus 4 times 3 is equal to 5 times x plus 2. Then I just needed to distribute. This is to the first power. My degree is 1, so I get all my x's on one side and all my numbers on the other. Now, I like to keep my x's positive, so I went ahead and subtracted 3x from both sides, and I ended up with x equals 1. Now, this one was a little bit tougher and required a lot more work. So again, we need to get rid of those denominators. They are different. A plus 1 and a minus 1 is different. So I went ahead and multiplied both sides by a plus 1, and that ended up with 6 is equal to a times a plus 1, and then I had to multiply both sides by a minus 1, and that gave me a minus 1 times 6 is equal to a times a plus 1. Well, when I distributed, I ended up with 6a minus 6 equals a squared plus a. Well, that gave me a degree of 2, so I need to set that equal to 0 and solve. So I went ahead and subtracted and got it equal to 0. And then I needed to use the box to find what my factors were, and then you set each factor equal to 0 and you solve. So hopefully you got that. And then the last one was a bit of a doozy, but it actually wasn't so bad. It's just like those first 2 questions. So the first thing I did was I found my horizontal and my vertical asymptotes given this graph. Well, I had 2 vertical asymptotes right here. I have one at -1 and one at +4. And so what I needed to do is look at and find my vertical asymptotes for all of these, because these all give me close to the same horizontal asymptote. So again, that's not a way for me to differentiate between them. So what I did was I found that this was x equals 0. Well, that doesn't work because it crosses the graph right there. So that's not going to work.